Hey YouTube world, what's going on? Mark here from TST Industries, back in the garage with another installation video. And as you can see in front of me, I have a full suite of products, and then behind me, I have a beautiful 3rd generation 2021 Yamaha MT-07. In this video, we will be going over the installation process of the TST Industries Elite-1 Fender Eliminator. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so before we head on over to the bike and actually install this, I do want to just showcase what is going on in the table in front of me, and I want to illustrate how to pre-assemble this kit. In particular, if you get the adjustable kit, there are a lot of moving components, no pun intended. So I just want to ensure that you understand how to assemble this, you get a good grasp of it, because the last thing you want is to pre-assemble this, you go to the bike and it's done incorrectly, or you skip through all this, you go to the bike and realize, oh, I probably should have pre-installed this. So this is our adjustable kit, this is our standard kit. Our standard kit is pretty self-explanatory. It's a stationary bracket. It includes 2 nuts and 2 bolts and washers that are to be used. It is a stationary kit, meaning it doesn't move. It's mounted in one location on the closeout on these rearmost holes, and that's it. It does have a hole stamped out in the center at this bend, and that is in case you want to use our optional universal license plate light. We have this available as a buy together option in our Fender Eliminator ads. It is not included by default. Please read the product page and ensure that you don't think you're receiving this when you're not, or you pay for it and you don't need it. We believe in giving the customers the option and making our products as modular as possible, so you're not stuck paying for something you may not want or need. Moving on from that, I should also mention that the closeout also has a hole in the center, and that is to be used for the universal license plate light. So if you are installing that, you can route the wires through there, out of the top, into your trunk compartment, and connect them as shown in our universal license plate light video. That is a separate video. We will not be showing that here. If you are not using a license plate light, we do include a small countersunk bolt and a respective nylock flanged lock nut, and that is to be dropped in that center hole and closed off with this nut. Pretty self-explanatory. It just helps close up that hole left behind so you don't get water and debris getting into your trunk compartment. Now, coming on over to the adjustable kit, because this is the kit we're focusing on, I want to push this aside, and actually all the hardware for the closeout, we're going to push that aside. And let's go ahead and focus on the adjustable kit. So here we have the components. We have a flat bracket with TST branding on it, 3 holes. You'll see why there are 3 holes, and then the slots for your license plate light, or your license plate, I should say. Then we have 2 90-degree brackets, 90 degrees in this sense, but if you look from the side, they are side specific. So if this is the rear of your bike and you're looking at the tail light dead on, you want this bracket on the right side and this bracket on the left side. So if you have them like that, it should sit as such. If you have them opposite, or in any other configuration, you will notice that your license plate is going to be facing downward most of the time. You don't want that, you don't need that. I mean, if you do, that's on you. We don't recommend that. So be sure to install this as we illustrated, and you will be all good to go. It should sit like that. Now, moving on from there, what you can do is take these standoff hinges. They are curved, as you can see, and the hooked portion should face the rear of the bike. So please keep that in mind. What you will want to do is take the 2 M6 bolts that are included and their respective washers. You're going to drop them into the closeout from the top, with the washers on the top of the closeout as well. And then you're going to take the standoff hinges and thread them on by hand until you get to a point where you're happy. You want to keep everything pretty loose, because as you go to install it and adjust your angle on this adjustable kit, you will notice that having everything tight initially just gives you a little bit of a headache. Ideally, these 2 standoff hinges should be as parallel as possible to one another. I know it's a little bit hard to get them perfectly parallel, so a little trick I like to use is just keep them very loose, then install the 90-degree brackets and then the flat bracket. This bracket is completely flat. So if you install this bracket on these 90-degree bends and then onto the standoff hinges, ideally, everything should line up perfectly at 90-degree angles. So don't lock any of these components down until you are comfortable and understand that. Next up, you will notice that on the outside of the standoff hinges, we have a small raised lip, and that is intentional. I don't know if you could see that on camera, but that is intentional. It is cut out perfectly to the diameter of these 90-degree brackets. And with that said, you can take another pair of the screws, the M6 screws, M6 bolts, and the washers, and hand feed them on until they bottom out. You want to make sure that that 90-degree bracket is sitting around that raised edge to prevent any stress on the bends. Now that we have that one, we're going to copy that step to the other side. And again, hand thread everything before using tools. We do get asked quite frequently, can I use Loctite on this? The answer is yes. And I will go over that towards the end of this video. So as you can see, we have a nice setup. Everything is still very loose. I can move everything around, but we have a nice base. At this point, we can install our flat bracket onto the 90-degree brackets using the provided countersunk bolts. These are the same length and diameter as the small one to plug in the center hole on the closeout, so keep that in mind. And we have 3 holes because on some bikes, you do need a wider range, and on others, you need a smaller range. So what I like to do is go on the center hole for this particular setup. Grab the nut, hand thread it on, bottoming it out, and then copy that step on the other side. And voila, there you have it. So this entire kit is now pre-assembled. Nothing is tightened down, as that is the way it should be. And when we say that this is adjustable, this is exactly what we mean. You will have the ability to swing this at an angle that you set. And once you like the angle that you're at, you lock down all the hardware and you're good to go. So without further ado, now that I've shown you this, let's go ahead and jump onto the bike and begin the installation process. So with the kit pre-assembled, we can go ahead and begin gaining access to remove the Oem Fender. You can do so by removing the passenger seat and then grabbing a 5mm hex key or Allen key, or using the provided hardware underneath your passenger seat if you have that, and then removing the rider seat as well. Now this is slightly different from the integrated taillight installation if you are watching that at the same time or plan on watching that. The only difference is that we will not be removing these 2 bolts securing the taillight to the subframe. We're going to leave those secured, that way the taillight isn't flopping around too much. And with this kit pre-installed, pre-assembled I should say, you will notice we have 3 holes left. We have a bit of hardware left. We have 5 pieces of hardware. If you don't plan on using a license plate light, you can block off this center hole with the provided countersunk bolt and the additional nylock locking nut. So because I'm not showing that on video, we do have a dedicated installation video on our universal license plate light showing several different common installation methods. You can reference that video for that. I'm gonna go ahead and plug that hole up. As you can see, it sits flush. We can actually bottom that out if we want. I'm gonna do that in just a few seconds. But before doing that, I do need to mention that there are some push pins on the underside of this bike. We will be showing those as well. What we're gonna start with is removing the hardware on the top side, which includes these 2 bolts, these 2 bolts. Underneath these tabs, we have 2 bolts, and then these 2 bolts. That should give us access to separate this tail section and the tail fairing and give us access to the 4 bolts securing the Oem Fender to the bike. So I'm going to grab 4mm hex key, Allen key, remove these 2 and their respective washers. With the 4 still in hand, I will also remove these. And then these 4. Now it's important to note that on these 4 bolts, there are collars with them. Make sure you retain that hardware, as you can see here. Retain that collar for this bolt. So with all that hardware removed, we can now switch to the underside of the bike, loosen up all the push pins, separate these tail fairings, and then have full access to the 4 bolts securing the Oem Fender to the bike. So we're going to be working on focusing on these 5 push pins. There's 3 of the same size and 2 of the larger ones. Being that we're not going to be using this Oem Fender or this Oem flap here, these 2 larger ones with the texture on them will actually be replaced with the provided plugs we include in our Fender Eliminator kit. So keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and remove all 5 of these. Push on the center. If you're not familiar with push pin fasteners, by pushing on the center, you can then remove all of them. At this point, we can actually remove this center flap as well. This is just like a dust cover, I guess, that Yamaha included. You can just pull down and pull forward, releasing it from the Oem Fender. And now, with careful pressure, we can actually pull this tail section apart. And as you can see, that gives me full access to the entire underside of the bike. You can remove this if it's getting in your way. We will be reinstalling that. Now the 4 bolts we are going to be focusing on, if you follow the fender, you'll see them are right here. So let's go ahead and begin removing those. I believe they are an 8mm socket, which is exactly what I need and have. Something to note, these bolts do have Loctite on them from Yamaha, so don't be alarmed if they are a little tight or you feel a little friction when removing them. That is actually the case. For those of you in the comments who have never watched a TST video, probably wondering what this is. It's just a rotating ratchet. Google rotating ratchet. It's probably our #1 asked question on YouTube. What kind of tool is that? Well, it's just a rotating ratchet. So we're gonna loosen them all up. There's 4 of them, 2 on each side. Not gonna remove them just yet. We don't wanna remove all of them just yet because this entire assembly will just fall. So I'm gonna remove 2 that are diagonal from each other and keep 2 in the bike. We know where the bolts are, what we need access to. So now I'm actually gonna go to the top of the bike and we're gonna follow these wires. If you haven't installed our tail light, if you're doing this first, or if you don't plan on installing a tail light, you will need to disconnect the wires for the turn signals and the license plate light. So let's go ahead and go to the top of the bike and disconnect those cables. So coming to the top of the bike, if you've been watching these shots, you'll notice that I did have some wires pushed aside. That is because we've already installed our TST integrated taillight. If you haven't done that, or you don't plan on installing a taillight, these 3 connectors will still be connected. This black one, the black one and the white one are the turn signals. The gray one is the OEM license plate light. The black wire, however, is a little bit longer and it's actually located underneath this metal bracket. So if you need to gain access to that, if you haven't already, these are 10mm heads. You can just use a socket and remove them. That will give you access to the connector underneath here. I will show you how to disconnect the connectors, because I do think that is pretty vital information. A lot of people are familiar with the various types of connectors found on electrical plugs. But we're going to take this white connector, kind of tuck everything out of the way so you have a nice viewing area. All right, now as you can see, we have the white connector connected. You want to use a small tool if needed. You can just use your fingers and apply some serious force and get it. I like to use a small tool just to make it a little bit easier. You're going to lift up on this tab and then pull. Now let me go ahead and show that with a black connector so you get a little bit of contrast in case you couldn't see that. But again, it's connected. You're going to lift up on this tab in the center and pull gently, releasing it from its locking position. So at this point we are good to go. We can go ahead and remove the OEM fender. Because I've already removed 2 of the 4 bolts underneath, I'm just gonna go ahead, without showing this on camera, remove the final 2 bolts and then begin snaking all of these wires out towards the rear of the bike. It is important to know we have some cable management ties. We've shown how to release those, but in short, let me go ahead and swing this around. You have this one, and then you'll have a small white zip tie. You can lift up on one end and then lift up on the other, releasing this and releasing all the wires from the routing clip. And then you can reinsert that if needed. So let's go ahead and go underneath and finish removing this fender at this point. There we are. Put our tool to the side, remove these 2 bolts, toss them. Those 4 OEM bolts with the thread locking, we will not be reusing those. And now you just want to carefully pull these out, make sure you're not getting snagged on anything. And voila, OEM fender is now removed. Now, to install our TST Fender Eliminator, you will need to gain access to this underside. I'm going to remove this rubber gasket that's sitting on top of our taillight. And as you can see, our taillight can pivot a bit at this point. If you want to go ahead and loosen up that taillight, that's perfectly fine and acceptable. It's actually encouraged. I'm going to go ahead and do that now, just so we can gain a little bit more access to show you all what exactly is going on. So I'm going to lift this up and kind of just toss it this way, giving you full access to see what's going on underneath. So with the OEM fender removed and the tail light kind of sitting up on top out of our way, you can now see what we're going to be working with. We have the closeout here and we have our remaining hardware. Outside of the push pins we removed and the 2 pins that we include with our kit, you should only have 2 long screws, 2 cylinders, and 2 of the nylock locking nuts, flange locking nuts. At this point, we're going to take half of the hardware, 1 of the long screws, 1 of the cylinders, and 1 of the nuts, and we're going to superimpose the cylinder over this hole on the closeout, these 2 holes. This one will reuse that push pin that we removed, the OEM one. So we're going to superimpose that over there. We are going to take the bolt, and it's the long countersunk bolt, and we will feed it through so that it sits through the cylinder, through the closeout. And now, I'm not sure if you can see that, we're going to be working inside this area in the subframe. So it does turn into a little bit of a tight fit. You may want to use a tool, or if you have a friend with small hands, whatever the case is, it does get a little tight. We want to put the nut on that bolt and just feed it until it starts hitting the nylon portion. That'll secure it to the bike in a sense, allowing us to grab the remaining hardware. And we're going to copy those steps. So this time I'm actually gonna feed the bolt through the closeout first, then the cylinder. And now we can take the nut and feed it onto the screw. Now it's important to note, those 4 threaded bosses are still there. That was what the OEM Fender was sitting on. We are not using those holes. Please keep note of that. We are not feeding those bolts through these threaded bosses. We are using the 2 unthreaded holes that are on the subframe. Now with that in place, everything's kind of floating around here. It's actually pretty nice. This allows us to put the tail section pieces back in place and begin figuring out how we're going to close this up so that it looks and feels seamless. A small gap is to be expected in a sense, but if you push these tail fairing pieces closed, we can actually see the gap is pretty minimal. And with the closeout being loose, I can move this around and ensure that I'm giving it everything we can to give it a seamless fit. So I'm gonna leave it like that. I'm gonna grab our 8mm box wrench and a 3mm hex key or Allen key, and I'm going to begin tightening the closeout down now that I know that these pieces will all interface correctly. These tail fairing pieces are interesting because they have a lower portion and then this small clip, and you need that small clip. You need the lower portion to sit on the bottom of the closeout, but that small lip to sit on the top portion of the closeout. So you might have to do a little bit of massaging there to get it nice and seamless, or as seamless as possible, but it is achievable. A small gap isn't anything to be alarmed about, so please, please, please keep that in mind. We're gonna go ahead and tighten these longer bolts at this point. I'm gonna do them one at a time, as to not create tension on one side. And before I actually bottom it out completely, I will lay the tail fairings on it yet again. So I can still move this around a little bit, not as much as I did before. Tighten that just a tiny bit more. And same for this side. Perfect. So I could take these tail fairing pieces, and you can see what I mean. That clip actually got hung up and is preventing it from sitting properly. So I'll need to just work with this, massage it a bit, get that underneath and over. And I'm pretty happy with where that is sitting at this point. You can see a small gap. Again, it is completely normal. So what I'm gonna do now is bottom those 2 bolts out. We've gone ahead and already tightened and secured these 3 bolts. And the last adjustments we'll have to make will be on the swinging angle of the adjustable kit. Perfect. Separate those 2. I know that a small gap is to be expected, so I'm not worried. We're gonna secure our tail light now. Put that in place. Grab our 4mm tool, tighten this down. Pretty happy with that. If I look underneath, the closeout is perfectly centered with the tail light, and we can begin the reinstallation process. Before we start everything on the top, we do need to reinsert all of those push pins, so let's go ahead and go underneath the bike. Now we can go ahead and reassemble this undertail section. It's important to note that this is the OEM undertail panel. It has this small tab and the 4 receiving holes for the push pins. We need the tab at the front to slide into this accepting feature, and while doing so, also make sure that this piece sits underneath the side panels. So one at a time, nice and easy. Patience on this and just massaging it through will be your best bet. Now you can see if I let this go, a small gap will appear, and that's fairly normal. That is nothing to be alarmed on. If you want, you can keep massaging this over or remove everything and try and work with it, you can get it pretty minimal, but a small gap is to be expected. So just please keep that in mind as you begin this process of buttoning up your bike. At this point, we can grab all of our push pins. We're grabbing the 3 small OEM ones we removed. When we removed them, they ended up like this. We're going to apply pressure gently and have it protrude out of the front and insert them into their respective holes. So we have the lower one up top, in the middle, and another one on the lower side opposite. Now for the 2 remaining holes, that's where the provided hardware that we include with our kit comes in handy. These are not push pins the same style. They're not rivet push pins. They're just push pins. So these you'll just insert and push through, securing the undertail panel to the sub tray and all of the surrounding body components. At this point, we can go to the top, button everything up, and before we actually go for a ride, we're going to make our final adjustments on this piece. If you'd like, you can do that at this point. It's entirely up to you. Coming to the top of the bike, we do want to go ahead and reinsert this rubber seal, this rubber gasket thing that was sitting on top of the OEM's taillight and our taillight for that matter. So we are actually going to just pry this apart just a little bit, just enough to get it underneath. Those push pins are locking this all in place. So we just want to massage this rubber piece in place rather than removing everything again. Now I'm happy with that. We can reinstall those 2 screws. Those were the smaller 4mm silver self-threading screws. And these are just fastened into a metal retaining clip. If you over tighten these, they will skip a thread. You didn't snap them, you didn't mess it up, you just skipped the thread. So don't hulk these down or else you're gonna feel it get loose and you'll have to do it again. Pretty happy with that. Now we could take the 4 silver bolt or the 4 larger black bolts that we removed with the collars, and we'll insert all the collars into the receiving holes. That makes it easier to insert the bolt after. Bottom out, and then go about 1/8 of a turn in. Now it's important to note that sometimes we get asked, can I use thread locking compound on the Fender Eliminator components? In short, if you install it correctly, you don't need to. However, for added security, you can on certain kits. This is a kit that if you are going to use thread locking compound, thread locking, or thread locking agents, do off gas, and the off gassing can cause stress on some of these plastic components and can cause them to become brittle and then crack over time. I would, if you're going to use thread locking compound, use the lowest or lower strength one and apply it before reassembling a lot of these plastic components, just to prevent any possible stress fractures on some of these plastic components. With this all buttoned up, we're pretty much good to go. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the rider seat, apply pressure on the front. Perfect. Perfect. Happy with that. And lastly, our passenger seat. We're going to go underneath the bike at this point, make our final adjustments, and this installation will be complete. Coming back underneath the underside of the bike, we are going to make our final adjustments. What I find easiest is to adjust it first, tighten it to a point where it's not just going to fall down, install your license plate, see how you like that angle, and then make your final adjustment. So I'm going to do just that. Just tighten it down just enough where I can test this out. At this point, if you are using a license plate light, again, watch our video on that. But if you did route the wires through and you have your plate light sitting here, you would sandwich the plate light between this bracket and the back of your license plate. So keep that in mind. We're gonna grab our hardware. And again, this is just a test fit to see what kind of angle we're sitting at. We're not done just yet. Showing you the easiest way to get things done. So if you like that angle, cool. If you don't, luckily you didn't tighten these down and you can adjust as needed. I like to go a little bit higher so that it's sitting more at an angle away, not perpendicular to the ground, and it shouldn't interfere with the tire. If it interferes with the tire, you might have some suspension issues, so just keep that in mind. But at this point, I'm pretty happy with that angle, so I'm gonna tighten these two on the side down to where they won't move. And now I'm going to remove the plate. And lastly, we can make the final adjustments on this hardware right here. So we're gonna try and center this off as much as possible with the logo on the closeout and our branding on the underside of the tail, bottom side of the tail light. I'm pretty happy with that. Now you can reinstall your license plate, go for a ride, call it a day. This installation is complete. With that all said, this installation is complete and you can now go out for a ride. As you can see, looking at the rear of the bike, this is a complete transformation. Obviously paired with our integrated tail light, it really does clean up the entire rear end of the bike and give it a sleek, finished look. And the option to swing this down, have it stationary, the choice is yours. Everything is modular and we love that. We give the choice to you, the customer. So if you want to check this out, if you're interested in this product or any other product we might have for this bike or any other bike, be sure to drop by tstindustries.com. Link is in the description. Don't forget to check us out. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Give us a like, give us a follow. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell on. Leave questions, comments, feedback in the comment section below. For now, this is Mark, TST Industries. Catch you guys next time.